Welcome to the Seed to Table video series. This video is produced in partnership between the Calgary Horticultural Society and the City of Calgary as part of a circular economy initiative. The circular economy eliminates waste and pollution and conserves resources. It is a shift from a throwaway to a circular mindset to extend the life cycle of goods, food, and resources through better design and continuous reuse so nothing goes to waste. The table specifically is a low input growing initiative that goes through each of the steps required in a gardening journey. The classes and resources in this initiative will help you to become increasingly self-sufficient, save money, and reduce waste. Below you see the steps in our Seed to Table journey. You can start the cycle at different points of the year, but may have to adjust what or where you're growing. Planning is a very important part of this journey. Don't grow what you won't use. Research plant growing conditions and use as much of a plant as possible. Think about how to reduce inputs at each step of the way. For example, build up good soil to reduce reliance on fertilizers and use renewable materials instead of plastics. Be a good observer and you can catch potential problems early. Overall, think about how you can become more self-sufficient, save money, and reduce waste. Enjoy the following video to answer those questions.
Hello there, my name is Jennifer Hoglund. Today we are going to talk all about drying or dehydrating our produce. Does this picture look familiar to anybody? Those of us with large fruit trees, berry shrubs, and vegetable gardens know all about the large glut of produce that we have at the end of the growing season. Dehydrating is one way that we can preserve our produce to last through our long, colder months, through fall, into winter, and right through until spring. So today we're going to talk about everything drying and dehydrating. Why drying is a great option for preserving our produce. Then we're going to talk about all the different techniques we can use to dry. Very importantly, how to tell when that produce is fully dry. Talk a little bit about some pre-treatments that are required for some fruits and vegetables. How to store our produce once it is dry. And the most important part, how to use that dried produce in our kitchens. Eating it, after all, is the entire point. One of the best things about drying and dehydrating is that it can last a really long time. We say at least 1 year. After around that year point, it does start to lose a little bit in terms of vibrant color or flavor. Still edible, but a minimum of 1 year for dried storage easily if it's kept at cool and in a dark place. The other great thing is that storage is power free. So unlike other ways of preserving like freezing, if the power does go out, we are absolutely fine with our dried produce. Dried produce is also very light and very small. The process of drying removes all that water, and that makes the produce much smaller in size and much lighter. That makes it perfect if we are short on storage space in our pantries, and also perfect for things like travel, camping, and hiking. Dried produce is absolutely ideal. Before we start the process of dehydration, we do need to make sure that we have the best produce possible. First and foremost, that means we need to make sure our produce is ripe. So it is the right color, the right size, softness, or sweetness. And if we're unsure, we can always check our seed packages. Okay, seed packages will tell us the ideal size or color for ripeness. We also want to make sure that when we're preserving in any method, we're preserving the best specimens. So none with bruising or spots or insect damage, anything like that. Those ones with a little bit of damage, we want to make sure that we use up first. We eat those ones right away, and it's the more pristine ones that we want to save for preserving. We also want to make sure that we do not wash until right before we're ready to use them, either to eat or to process via dehydrating or any other preservation technique. If we wash earlier, that moisture left on there just starts to deteriorate our produce faster. And as we go through this presentation And as we think about preserving our harvests, I really want you to think about using all parts of the plant. Think about those beet greens or those carrot tops or those apple peels. All of those are parts of the plants that we typically throw away or compost, but we can absolutely use those in our cooking and even in our preserving, like drying. So think about that as we go through today. There are 6 different techniques we can use to dry or dehydrate our produce. Which one we use will depend on a few things. The equipment that we happen to have on hand, and how much time we have. Some techniques are quicker than others, and of course, which fruit or vegetable we are drying. Not every technique is appropriate for every single type of fruit or vegetable, so that will also make a difference. We'll try to point these out as we go through for each technique. For all the techniques, it's really important to think about airflow. Airflow, when we have good airflow around our produce while it's drying, we are ensuring that each part dries equally and also ensuring that we don't have any parts that are that hold on to moisture, ideally, and end up with mold or mildew issues or rot. So airflow is going to be key no matter which technique we choose. And also when we need to think about the size of our produce and its moisture content. How long things take to dry is going to depend on how thick the pieces are, how large the pieces are, and obviously how much moisture is in those pieces to begin with. So all things to think about when we are choosing which technique to use. Air drying and sun drying is our first 2 techniques for drying our produce. For air drying, we typically wash and give a quick dry, like a salad spinner or a towel, and then bundle or tie up our produce to dry. This is done indoors, okay? We like to hang them in an area that has good airflow, good air circulation, and is out of direct sunlight. Okay, sunlight is just going to reduce those nice bright colors that we have. So in a pantry, someplace without a window. This is my pantry here, and these are herbs that I have set to air dry. Herbs and flowers are great for air drying. They dry fairly quickly, and air drying and sun drying are both very slow methods. So this is great for things that typically dry quickly by themselves. If I'm doing herbs, I will tie them in a bunch like we have here and just attached to my shelving. This works really well. You can go in and check on whether or not they're dry consistently. These will typically take around 2 weeks to dry fully. If I'm doing something that is smaller pieces like flowers, I will dry them on a mesh rack. If they're large enough, they will fit on these slats as well, but a lot of my flowers aren't. So on a mesh rack works really well. That now enables airflow to go underneath as well as from on top. Okay, really important. Sun drying, few more considerations to think about. Sun drying is outside in the sun, as it sounds. And as a result, we need to have good weather to sun dry. So it needs to be warm, needs to be sunny, and it needs to be dry outside. So we need a really good break in the weather. This is something that we do late summer, very early fall. Not great for late fall and into winter, obviously. We don't have the heat at that time. Speaking of heat, if we are sun drying and we happen to have cooler nights, it's a great idea to bring that produce into the house at the nighttime and then bring it back outside during the day. That way we don't get that cool air condensing moisture right on that produce, defeating the drying that we've done during the day. So bring it in at night if we have cool nights. We also need to think about protecting that produce when it's outside in the sun from things that want to eat it. So that's insects, that is rodents, that is dogs, whatever is out there, we need to protect it in some way. There are lots of plans if you want to geek out on the sun drying. If you go online, there's tons of plans on sun drying setups and racks and configurations. that you can absolutely build yourself. So some great ideas online if you so choose. The next two options or techniques for drying are our oven and a dehydrator. We're doing these together because they're very similar. And I like to always encourage people, if you haven't done any drying previously, your oven is a great place to start. Okay, you don't have to invest in any machinery. It's a great way to find out if you like dehydrating. I'm sure you will. And want to continue doing it, and how much of it you want to continue doing, where you can then decide if you would like to invest in a dehydrator. So for ovens, the very first important thing to think about is to make sure your oven can get to a low enough temperature. For dehydrating, we want around 110 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. There are a few of the newer ovens that don't go that low. Some of them won't go below 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So your first step is to ensure that your oven goes low enough. The second thing to think about with ovens is that there isn't airflow in them. So a really great idea is to wedge open that door when you're drying in there. I like to stick a wooden spoon and just wedge that door open so that you can get that added airflow. Okay, a couple downsides to using your oven. You can't use your oven for other things when you're drying. And drying does take numerous hours. It can take between 2 or 3 hours all the way to 48 hours depending what you're drying. So your oven is out of use for that time period, something to keep in mind. And if you have little ones running around, it can be a bit of a hazard. So there are some drawbacks to using oven, but it is a great place to start when you are first looking at dehydrating. All right, as for using a dehydrating machine, these work really good and they have some pros. They have very low temperatures, often a number of precise temperatures for different types of things that you are dehydrating, which is nice. They have a built-in fan and slotted trays so that we get really good airflow. And they often come with some really great accessories, such as mesh sheets for very small pieces that we may want to dehydrate, like for herbs. And they often come with things like unperforated trays for making fruit leathers. Those are fantastic and really fun to play with and great. Dehydrating machines aren't super expensive, but I don't want you to invest in something unless you know it's something that you're going to use. So start with your oven, if that's what you have, and then move on to the dehydrator. The last two techniques for drying are using the microwave and using a freeze dryer. Let's start off with microwave. So a microwave is only really good for drying some of our hardier herbs. These are things like rosemary or sage, even parsley. The microwave is perfect for that. It's not really good for drying anything else. No, none of our more softer herbs like basil or cilantro, and definitely not good for fruits or other fruits or vegetables. So stick with herbs, the really tough ones for the microwave only. The process is really easy. All we do is we have a plate, put a couple paper towels on top, add our herbs, a couple more paper towels, put it in the microwave on high for 1 minute, check it, and then we do 20-second intervals from then on, checking between each interval to make sure it is dry and crumbly. That's it. Works really good at ensuring our herbs keep that nice bright green color, and it's a very, very quick process for drying. Freeze dryer is a newer appliance to the home cook and home preserver. It is a very large piece of equipment, much bigger than a mixer, let's say, and it can be quite expensive. They usually start around $2,500 right now. So this is if you are very, very into drying and dehydrating, and you really want to experiment. That being said, it is very cool to play with a freeze dryer. You can dehydrate everything from eggs to milk to beef stew to candy. And it gives you a really unique texture that we can't get with other techniques for drying. It's very light. It removes 100% of the moisture. If you've ever had astronaut food, that novelty astronaut food, that's the texture you can get from a freeze dryer. So really fun to play around, however, very much expensive and very large. So just an idea. A really important consideration when we talk about drying and dehydrating our produce is determining where the point is where it is fully dry, right? We don't want to store produce that is not fully dry because then we end up with mold and rot and other issues like that. Not good. So where is the point where it is fully dry? Well, some things we want to dry to the point where it is brittle and crumbly. So when we smash it with a hammer, it shatters. So brittle and completely dry. These are things like our greens, celery, corn, peas, our dry beans, our berries, rhubarb, okay, things like that we want to dry completely to that point. So here we have garlic in the top right corner that we want to dry to that point. Right underneath that we have dried peppers, okay, dry, brittle, crumbles or shatters when we break it apart. Some other things we want to dry to the point of tough and leathery. Okay, still pliable, we still want to be able to bend it, but when we tear it apart, there's no moisture left on the inside. If anybody has bought dried apples from the grocery store, that's the texture that we're going for. So we want that pliability, but still fully dry in the center for things like our fruits, peaches, pears, apples, plums, and for our root vegetables, things like squash, pumpkins, as well as green beans. Those were going to the point of tough and leathery. All right, fruit leathers, we have their own classification of fully dry because they're a little bit different. Fruit leathers, we want to be still a tiny bit tacky when we touch them with our finger on the top. Okay, so a tiny bit tacky, but we want it dry enough to be able to easily peel away without leaving any bits behind when we pull it from that saran wrap or those trays in our dehydrator. And that is how we tell fruit leather is fully dry. Some of our fruits and vegetables really benefit from pre-treating. Okay, the first reason for pre-treating is fruits or vegetables that oxidize. That just means turning brown. So anybody who's cut an apple, apples will turn brown if they are left in the air for too long, right? So for sweet foods like apples, we dip them in an acidic solution. So we add a teaspoon of lemon juice or vinegar to about 1 liter or 4 cups of water. That's the concentration that we use. And it's just a matter of slicing up that produce, dipping it in that acidic solution, and then putting them on our trays. For savory foods like potatoes that oxidize very quickly, we do the same thing, but instead of an acid solution, we use a saltwater solution. Once again, about 1 teaspoon per liter or 4 cups. We dip in our cut up potatoes and then put them directly onto those racks to dry. We can also blanch foods. There's 2 different reasons for blanching. One is to sweeten them up. So these are tart foods, things like rhubarb that are really, really sour. We add a sweetener like honey or sugar to the water while we're blanching just to give them a little bit more sweetness. We also blanch foods that are really tough, things like turnips and carrots and rutabaga. We give them just a little bit of cooking just to start that softening process before we dry them. So for that blanching process, it's a very quick and easy process. We put a pot of boiling water on our stove. Once it is at boiling point, we put up our washed and cut up vegetables or fruit quickly into the water. Let them cook for 30 seconds to 1 minute just to brighten them up and get them a tiny bit soft. Then we remove them from the boiling water and put them very directly into an ice bath. Okay, that ice bath stops the cooking so that it doesn't soften up anymore or overcook. Once it is fully cooled off, we remove our produce from the ice bath, pat them dry in a towel or put them in a spinner, salad spinner, and then they can go directly on to our drying racks. If we are blanching to sweeten things up, like that rhubarb, same process, we just add a couple teaspoons or a tablespoon per liter of hot water to that boiling water before we add the fruit. Same process. Once our produce is dry, we need to store it. And the key with storing dried produce is to make sure that it is in an airtight container. These containers can be mason jars, they can be food saver bags, or they can be regular zip top bags that we've just sucked all the air out of. All three of those work absolutely fine. Once they're in an airtight container, they can go into a cool, dark place to be stored. That can be a pantry, that works fine as long as it doesn't have a nice, beautiful window in there. We also need to talk about rehydrating because we often do that with our dry produce once we are about to use it. For almost everything that involves adding the dry produce to cool water, throwing it in a microwave or into a pot, bringing it up to a boil, and then letting it sit until it is at the right texture for our uses. Mushrooms are the one exception to that. Mushrooms, instead of putting into cool water and bringing up to a boil, we want to add boiling water straight to the mushrooms. Let them sit in that boiling water until they're at the right texture for us. I also encourage you, instead of rehydrating our produce in water, to think about rehydrating them directly in the food that we're cooking. So if we're making soups or stews, adding the dried produce directly to that so that as it rehydrates, it absorbs some of that flavor from our soups and stews. Just an added kick of flavor there. Now for the most important part, how to eat our dried produce. Use it in the kitchen and get it into our bellies. And we're going to start off with savory ways to use it. So as I just mentioned, adding your dried produce straight to soups, stews, and some casseroles is a perfect way to get really good flavor from it. But we can also use them in things like baked goods. So think all of our allium family, garlic, onions, as well as all of our herbs are fantastic in baked goods like biscuits and crackers and breads. Okay, we can also use our dry produce to flavor oils and vinegars. Think once again all of our allium, our onion family, all of our herbs, our dried tomatoes and peppers, beautiful in oils and vinegars. We can make those lightweight travel meals that we were talking about at the very beginning. Combine different dried produce together to make a meal. Add some bouillon powder or some spices to really kick up that flavor. Add some potatoes, either sliced or shredded, to add bulk, to help thicken, and really make those meals a good hearty meal. We can use different herbs that we've dried to make seasonings. So we can make our own Italian seasoning by mixing Italian herbs together. We can mix garlic and onion. We can add them to salts. Think garlic salt or onion salt. We can make tomato powder. This is a really great one. Dehydrate tomatoes, grind them up in a coffee grinder, and then rehydrate them to make tomato paste when we only add a little bit of water, or tomato sauce if we add a lot more water to rehydrate. Okay, we can use them as straight spices themselves. Think paprika and chili flakes. We can use our dried produce to make flour, corn, chickpeas, beans. Okay, grinding those up, once again, a coffee grinder works really well until it's a fine powder, allows us to use them as a flour substitute. Okay, a great use there. Or one of my favorite methods, using all those greens that we would typically compost, like beet greens, carrot tops, okay, celery greens, celery leaves, all of those things, dehydrate those, grind them up in the powder, and now we have a greens powder. For those of you that make a lot of smoothies and have ever bought greens powder, very expensive, right? This is a really cheap, easy way to make your own greens powder, okay? That from things that you typically would either throw away or compost. So it works really well. There are also a number of ways to use our dried produce in sweet applications. So baked goods are very common. Adding dried fruits or flowers or herbs to pies, cakes, crisps, muffins, biscuits. Don't forget those savory ones like carrots and carrot cake or zucchini and zucchini cake. We can also eat them just straight out of hand. Dried apple slices are fantastic, or chopped up and added to things like trail mix. We can use them as a snack topper on cereal or ice cream, and we can use them for tea. This is one that I do a ton of. So this is a lot of our herbs like mint and lemon balm, stevia if we want a sweetener. They can all be dried and put into a jar and stored so that we have nice warm teas throughout the winter months. You can also do this with edible flowers. Think chamomile, bergamot, marigolds, calendula, all great dried and made into teas. And don't forget to add a few fruit bits here and there as well. We can, of course, make fruit leathers. Any fruit can be pureed, add a little bit of water if you need to, and then spread on our trays to make fruit leather with. Sugar or a sweetener of some kind is absolutely optional. You don't need to add it if you don't want it in there. If your fruit is sweet enough, go straight fruit. Okay, and we can also grind our fruits and berries into sugars. So put them once again into a coffee grinder and then add them to sugar. These are great to use as a nice pretty colored garnish on our baked goods. We can use them straight in our baked goods as a sugar substitute, or we can add them into our teas as well to sweeten. There are also places that we can use dried produce that don't involve food at all. So decor or dried flowers, or things like those nice smelly sachets to keep things smelling beautiful. Great for those dried flowers. So in this video, we've learned how to preserve our harvests by drying them, allowing them to keep so that we can use them throughout our colder winter months. This allows us to become more self-sufficient, save money, and reduce waste in our garden spaces. Thank you very much. If you have any questions about the Seed to Table program or gardening in Calgary, feel free to go to the Calgary Horticultural Society website at calhort.org. Thank you.